up? Welcome to the live stream, y'all. What is up, everybody? May 22nd, 2025 on a Thursday, right? Yeah, see, I'm losing track because Friday I'm working from home. On a Thursday. What is up, everybody? It is, yeah, we're later. We're not later than normal because I've been on here mad late before. But with that being said, we're here, daily live stream. Got a couple clips to react. Welcome to Cozy Corner TV, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Kieran Smith, call me cute. And we are on the corner. We on the corner. What is up, everybody? So, got a couple clips today. Interesting day. Interesting day. We got some people on the menu who I don't usually throw on the menu for us to digest, but because of set topic, they have to kind of be up for today. With that being said, as an advocate for mental health and wellness, please make sure you're regulated and grounded. Why? Because news can be triggering, right? And with that being said, if you are not regulated and or grounded, come back and watch this later. But if you are, welcome to the live stream. I'm going to get into the menu as per usual. Alright guys, let's see. First up, we got, shout out to Face the Nation, co-author of Original Sin. In case you guys don't know, Jake Tapper's book, Original Sin, has dropped. I believe it dropped today. Original Sin discusses reporting on Biden's decline. So, I'm not going to lie. The reason why you guys hear some hesitancy in my voice when it comes to this is because, you know, I really don't like the way Jake Tapper does things sometimes. Like, sometimes it's really ill-fitting. I really didn't like this book. Like, I haven't read it, but I didn't like that he was coming out with it when I heard that he was dropping it. Because I was like, man, this is really hypocritical. And I didn't like what it was giving. But nonetheless, Face the Nation covered it about 2 hours ago. So we're going to take a look at that. Then we're going to switch gears and we're going to jump over to CNN. The View co-host, Unhelpful, to have Jill join Joe Biden for interview. So if you guys are wondering what is this pertaining to, there was an interview that Joe Biden had on The View. Let's just call it a pretty well-known show, left, very liberal show, but they do have a conservative voice on there. I think for the most part, most people would agree with me. Alyssa Farrow is probably the most conservative voice. If she's even still on there, is she? I'm not sure because I know she has her, does she have her own thing now? Let's see. Okay, she's still a co-host on The View, and news sources such as Newsweek confirmed she joined the show as a co-host in season 26, but she has been absent from the show on occasion due to illness. Okay, she's still a permanent co-host. All right. So for now, I thought I heard something about her getting her own thing, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's just not happening just yet. But nonetheless, Joe Biden had an interview on The View, and he had Jill join him. And, you know, typical questions, asking, you know, former President Joe Biden questions, kind of bashing current sitting President Trump, normal stuff. And then at some point they're asking Joe Biden a question, and Jill kind of chimes in, and she really kind of takes the show. If you look at the comment section in this video, which that was something I paid attention to very shortly after I watched it, people are really saying like, oh, it's a good thing that Joe Biden, you know, brought Jill to the interview, because without her, he probably wouldn't have survived it. So, I mean, yeah, they kind of questioned him in the interview because they said it was just not a great idea. It seems like Alyssa Farrow seems to think it was unhelpful, which I did watch the interview. I didn't feel like it, I'm not sure what the reasoning for it was, but I don't think it was the most helpful either. So then we'll switch gears and we'll jump over to Fox News clip. Shout out to them. Representative Ilhan Omar refuses to comment on Israel's killed. I'm going to go for now. So that pertains to a comment that Ilhan made on the way out of the courthouse earlier in the day. A reporter asked Ilhan, do you want to make a comment on the two Israeli members that were killed today? I think they were embassy workers. And she just commented, I'm going to go for now. You had... let's see, what's the gentleman's name? I thought this was hilarious. You have Mark Levin, when they asked Mark Levin, what's the reason you think that Ilhan would just make a comment like, I'm going to go for now, instead of at least giving condolences? And he said, you know, she's an Islamist. Hey, I think he was pretty spot on with that. We have heard Ilhan say some pretty extremist things, especially when it pertains to her being in the U.S. government and trying to, you know, fend for her own people, her own country of Somalia, right? Like, and she has been on record saying things like this, right? And they've come after her in the media. They've said things like, you know, she's not really to be trusted in the U.S. government. She really only wants to, you know, fend for her own people. You know, she's kind of like an imposter, if you will. So we're gonna take a look at that. That shooting was extremely unfortunate. I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism surrounding it because of the media is already talking about that, so we'll take a look at that. Then we'll switch gears. Fox News clips again. Brian, you're like a former linebacker for the Chicago Bears. Tackles the trans athlete debate. So he just kind of chimed in a little bit on what he thought about the whole trans athlete debate, and you know, his take on it for the most part was that he did not feel that boys should be able to play in the same sport as girls, because he's like, dude, listen, there's a huge biological difference, whether we want to be honest with ourselves or not. So we're going to take a look at that. Then we will end the live stream with a clip from Cliff Buell. Shout out to Cliff Buell. Check out his channel, guys, if you have a chance. He has 725,000 subscribers and counting. He focuses on Christian content, and every single night over here on the live stream, we end with a Christian clip or a Christian YouTuber reacting to something of the sort, pointing to Jesus. Let's say that. All right, guys. So with that being said, we're going to jump into the first clip of the live stream. Face the Nation, co-author of Original Sin, discusses reporting on Biden's decline. So let's take a listen.
Get everything we had to do with, well, if we finally beat Medicare.
It was answers like that during then President Biden's debate with now President Trump that allowed Democratic confidence in him to first atrophy, then collapse, forcing him ultimately out of the presidential race, as we all remember. And a new book finds Biden's inner circle tried very hard, and in many ways, to hide.
All right, let's give a shout out to the chat real quick. For Tina Franco, yo, shout out to you. Hi, how are you? What's up? Welcome to the live stream. VIP Monthly, yo, what's good to you? Welcome to the live stream, guys. Do me a favor and hit that like button. Giving the chat some shout outs. Peyton Maynard, do you play any games? Yo, what's up? Yo, what's up, Peyton Maynard? Shout out to you. Hit that like button for me. Yeah, I do actually play games. Usually I'm playing 2K. If not 2K, Call of Duty, and if not Call of Duty, there's a hunting game that I play, you know, where you kind of like run around the forest and you're like, you know, hunting bears and like white-tailed deer and all that good stuff. But I don't play it on YouTube. I don't play games on YouTube. All right, guys, let's get back into the clip.
Shield and obfuscate what they recall, and many Democrats now are willing to talk about, his mental and physical decline. I spoke with the co-author of that book. It's called Original Sin, Alex Thompson, earlier today. What is the sin, and what makes it the first one, or the original sin?
Well, this title actually came about as Democrats were wondering how they lost. So from the Democrat perspective, the sin was Donald Trump winning. And so as Democrats, right after the election, we started this book on November 6th, as Democrats were sort of looking at the wreckage and wondering how did this go wrong, a few people kept saying, going back and said, the original sin of this election, the most consequential moment, the biggest reason we lost. There are other things, Joe Rogan, you know, not going on Joe Rogan, and like, you know, Kamala Harris not being able to do media interviews. Yes, that's all bad. But the original sin was Joe Biden deciding to run for re-election.
How much of that openness to discuss this original sin that cropped up suddenly in the smoldering ruin of the election outcome struck you as a reporter, as CYA?
I'm a terrible note taker. My notes look like doctor's handwriting mixed with abstract art. And my type notes?
I mean, I think it was both CYA and also relief, and feeling that they could be finally say it. Because I think there was an element of fear that had basically rendered them all mute throughout the election. I mean, it was clear that to so many Democrats, I think we detail many instances of Democrats, both inside the administration and on Capitol Hill, that saw Joe Biden in 2023 and 2024 especially, and thought to themselves, he's not up to this, and they didn't say anything. And so I think some people were doing this with pangs of regret. I think also some people were like, the election was not our fault. Like it's all Joe Biden's fault. And I think what we try to do in this book is that we don't try to make it, it's all Joe Biden's fault. It's that Joe Biden decided to run for election, and then the entire Democratic Party, including people that knew better, that knew he was, if not even up to running a re-election campaign, certainly knew that he was not up to being president for 4 more years, did not say anything out of fear, and fear both of their own political careers, but also fear that doing so would only hurt Biden, making digging deeper and then help Donald Trump.
In 2017, there was a book that a lot of Americans saw, many read, called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. A bunch of psychiatrists got together and diagnosed what they described as dangerous psychological tendencies of Donald Trump, writing that it was their duty to warn the country. And one of the things they pointed out was what they detected was a kind of malignant narcissism. Should there have been, did there needed to have been a book with the title The Dangerous Case of Joe Biden?
Well, first of all, that book, I don't necessarily think had the effect the authors intended, given that. So I don't know if a book would have...
But evaluating Joe Biden as not just a typically narcissistic politician, but one driven by narcissism to a point of blindness, so far that his narcissism began to infect the Democratic Party, and essentially, as you and Jake Tapper report in this book, silenced so many people who otherwise knew better.
It's so interesting because Democrats love to mock Republicans for saying something different about Donald Trump in quiet, in private, and saying something different publicly, and then this sort of dear leader stuff. But if you read this book, they were doing the exact same thing.
The mirror image of that.
Yes, absolutely.
They're the ones who are now being mocked, that history is likely to mock.
I think so, and the way that they also treated those, similarly, you remember in 2017, 2018, some of those congressional Republicans that stuck their necks out, people like Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, and then they were just completely decapitated by their own party. Look at what happened to Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips spoke out, and he's no longer in Congress.
Right. Is there, from you and Jake, looking at the reporting on this, do you think that there was a moment when this rickety scaffolding actually began to collapse separate from the debate performance?
Yes.
Or was, okay, please.
Fall of 2023. I think is when, obviously we sort of say like good Biden and old Biden, or good Biden and or functioning Biden and non-functioning Biden. And back in 2019, 2020, you covered that primary too. Like there were moments that were like, that's a little odd.
Right.
But for the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, he was a little slower, but was definitely like with it. I think, the fall of 2023, I would say a few different factors. One is his son Hunter's plea deal unravels. A special counsel is appointed by Joe Biden's own attorney general to investigate his son and his son's business dealings that involve all sorts of the family. You have October 7th, and also aging is unpredictable. And by all accounts, from the more than 200 people that we talked to, and we almost exclusively interviewed Democrats because we wanted sort of this internal reckoning that the party was going through. We didn't, yes, Kevin McCarthy has something to say, other members, Republican members, but we wanted to get the internal Democrats, and Democrats that saw him at that time noticed a precipitous decline, that basically the ratio of functioning to non-functioning Biden not only changed significantly, but non-functioning Biden became much worse and would come out in unpredictable ways. And that's when you start seeing the inner Praetorian Guard, or Royal House Guard, as Chuck Schumer referred to them, really start shielding him more and more because they can't predict. And so they're basically like white knuckling it until the debate, their luck runs out.
There's so much fascinating reporting in here about the elaborate and increasingly elaborate mechanisms that this Praetorian Guard, this Politburo, whatever the phraseology used by either supporters or critics or those who really didn't have a dog in the fight but saw this clique of people around President Biden, the things that they went through and then orders they gave to try to minimize the visibility and the accumulated political harm of his decline.
Well, it's so interesting that we can use so many different phrases, Praetorian Guard, Royal Passport, and that's because this sort of system has existed in so many power centers all across history, all across cultures. And I think sometimes there's this feeling like, well, America, we're different. But like sometimes that sort of thing happens here. And what you saw over the course of October 2023, for example, this is more of a physical thing than a mental thing, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. They were terrified that he was going to have another fall because they were told that another fall would mean potentially a wheelchair, and that also he might even need a wheelchair in a second term anyway because his spine was degenerating. And so, they insisted on handrails every single place. They wanted to make the stairs shorter, not just on Air Force One, but everywhere. They wanted to limit the distance he had to walk any single time. They gave him new shoes, obviously. Other little things, because his energy became increasingly limited, public events in the early mornings or late at night, or even just in the early evening, those were definitely pushed off. When he would film like campaign commercials, and people on the campaign said this man could not speak. The amount of hours they had to put in order to make a digital video seem to make sense were just astronomical. And many campaigns need 2 cameras in order to deal with what they're called jump cuts. Right. But they needed so many of them to make anything presentable. At one point, the campaign even does a fake town hall, stage town hall, closed to press, so they can do a campaign commercial. And this isn't that unusual. Other campaigns have done this, but usually those campaigns are actually having candidates that are doing town halls. Joe Biden was not doing town halls, so they do this stage town hall in Delaware with supporters. They film the whole thing, and then the campaign determines that footage is unusable because he was still struggling to communicate.
How much of this story, Alex, is driven by the mythology of Joe Biden? Meaning, I was always given short odds by Democratic insiders, always underestimated. I beat Trump. I can only beat Trump. That's my myth. That's what I believe. And everyone has to ride along with me.
Yeah, he has been the mythology of Joe Biden.
And some of those things are true. I'm not suggesting they aren't.
Look at all the things Joe Biden has overcome in his life. Even before the recent presidency, obviously you have the accident. You have the fact that he lost in 1988, then overcame 2 brain aneurysms. He got his butt kicked in the 2008 primary, then became vice president. Then and then he won the 2020 Democratic primary. The thing is that, to your point, he can recite chapter and verse every single time that people counted him out, and he beat them. It is, if it's a Biden mythology, or as we call in the book, that became a theology. The first commandment is Joe Biden always comes back. And the reason why we frame this book as a tragedy is because this, probably his signature virtue, which is the never giving up, eventually became a tragic flaw. And the way that the people around Joe Biden describe his decision to run for a second term, what's so striking about it is how little process there was, and that it's a given. He deserves it. All presidents get 2 terms. And I think there was, that chip on the shoulder had just sort of consumed him in some ways.
Last question. Do you have any sense as to whether or not, as Democrats advance toward 2028, where were you on Joe Biden? What is your example of public cleansing and self-accountability for what you did or didn't do will be akin to the Iraq War vote was in 2008?
It's interesting you ask, because several Democrats have used that analogy, right? And they feel that if Hillary Clinton had voted a different way, she probably is president in 2008. And then, but that seminal "where were you at this moment" eventually allowed for a new person to come out of nowhere. In that case, it was Barack Obama. I don't know. How much does this really affect the politics 3 years from now? You don't know. I think some of it depends on how the Trump presidency goes, because if you're in 2027 and you and the Democratic Party is basically like, it's still in like, how did we let this happen mode, I think this could be a really key issue.
Oh yeah. It's going to be more than a key issue. It's going to mean that they're not gonna win the presidency, right? We've talked about that a couple times on the channel. I've talked about the level of tone deaf that we see in the Democratic Party is pretty disgusting, right? It's almost like, are they talking to any of the American people? Or are they only talking to migrants, right? Like, literally, it's a serious question because they seem so out of touch with the people. And I've said this, I'm like, man, if they keep it up at this rate, we're going to see a repeat of what we saw in 1929, you know? Yeah, and it's going to be reversed. Instead of the Republicans losing 5 terms straight, we're probably going to see it happen on the Democratic side. All right, guys, so switching gears, we're going to go to The View. Co-host Unhelpful to have Joe Biden for their for the interview, which was the interview on the View. So I wanted to say something pertaining to that. Do I want to go back to this? Let's see something. Give me 1 second, guys. So here's my problem with Original Sin. We see Jake Tapper, right? We've seen him be so corrupt on things like presidential debates, right? Just mainstream news media in general, right? Just reporting, just bad journalism, period, right? Very biased journalism. And we've seen him defend former President Joe Biden to no end, sometimes to certain degrees. Just completely against President Trump. Like, we've seen it. He was blatant about it, right? Even in the presidential debate, we see what he was doing, where at some point President Trump has to intervene and say, oh, I didn't realize I was debating more than one person. So just to see him come out with this, right? And just like them listing all of the things, like shortening his walk, like not wanting people to really see him in the public eye, trying to make sure he didn't walk a long distance if he had to walk any distance at all. I'm thinking to myself, okay, this made me think about the Chris Cuomo and the Bill O'Reilly conversation last night on Live, where Bill O'Reilly said, you know, the American people absolutely have to know what medical condition their president is in. He said, not they have to, they have the right to. And Chris Cuomo's argument on that was, I absolutely agree with you. They do have the right to, but it's not a right, because if it was a right, it would be something, we would get transparency, but we actually don't get that from our presidents. It's just interesting to see that he was dealing with all that, and behind the scenes they were doing all of that. And they weren't being transparent to the American people at all for 1 second about his health conditions. So I just think that that's really interesting. All right, guys. So yeah, CNN, The View co-host, Unhelpful to have Jill join Biden for an interview. Let's take a listen.
Joe Biden totally effed us. That, a quote from a Kamala Harris official in a new book that paints a damning picture of how far the White House went to hide his decline. Among the revelations from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's book, Biden's team hid him from his staff and even members of his cabinet. They considered that he may need a wheelchair in the future and contradicted warnings from his doctor. And Biden didn't recognize George Clooney, one of his longtime supporters, and of course, one of the most famous movie stars and faces on the planet. But as the scandal branches grow, what about the people who have political runways, the Pete Buttigieg of the world, hitting a Midwest tour, Kamala Harris thinking about a run for California governor? Will and should their futures be impacted by this scandal? It kind of seems like the answer has to be yes, right?
Well, wait a minute.
Especially for someone like Kamala Harris.
The problem is
in the White
now
House.
every Democrat's rushing to say, oh my gosh, Joe Biden wasn't fit to run for re-election. But they let him stay in running the country for another 5 months. It's complete hypocrisy to say, yes, we think he wasn't fit, but it was okay that policy continued to be made and we didn't ask him to step down.
It's tragic for the Democratic Party to have let him go on so long when clearly people around him knew that there was a serious problem. The people closest to him had been close to him for years, most of them like 20 years, so they were super loyal to him, more than normal analysts, activists who come and go. I don't know that I retain, as a Democrat, if I retain being a Democrat, if I'm mad at Pete Buttigieg because he didn't am I mad at Kamala? I would not think it would be her responsibility to say, you're not, now, might she say something privately? Yeah, but I would not expect her to publicly.
But I guess
what the
maybe
25th Amendment's all
not
about,
you
though.
so much, but like because you're left leaning. Like talking about the average American when they ask the question, "What did you know and when did you know it?"
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And I think one of the things that is in the excerpts from this book is this idea that it wasn't just that Kamala Harris only had 100+ days to run, but that the idea that Americans felt like they were being deceived by the Democratic Party, it tainted her in that last election already.
She did the deceiving. She's
Well, I
the
think that this is the
attack.
question. I mean, how does she escape that?
This was something where I think the public was ahead of where the politicians and even to some degree the media was. 2 years before the disastrous debate, we were sitting there together. Abby, there were polls that were showing 67% of Americans thought Joe Biden was too old to have another term. And Democratic politicians did not listen to those warnings. And I interviewed Joe Biden a week and a half ago on The
They
View.
should have picked somebody
I left
then.
thinking he definitely could not have done another 4 years. I'm grateful for his service. He had a good command of the facts of things he was proud of to talk about that he did, but there was just no way that Joe Biden could do 4 more years. And I do think the future leaders of the party have to say something better than it's time to look forward. They need to address that the public was saying we need someone else, and they waited until the last minute and frankly did not have a particularly
I have a
desperate
quick
process.
question, Melissa, about that interview. I mean, what did you make of the fact that Jill Biden was there with him?
I thought it was very unhelpful. I asked the specific question about allegations of his cognitive decline, and he began to answer it, and then she jumped in for him. And I get it, as a spouse, you want to help your partner, but that was his moment to knock out of the park any fear that he has cognitive decline, and it played into basically the worst assumptions, that he can't finish sentences and she had to help him out.
I think Democrats have to start doing what these two things right here, start listening a little bit more, because Representative Dean Phillips went on a tour in November, October. He went on Pod Save America, where David Plouffe and all these folks went to complain about how they didn't have enough time. And they didn't listen to Dean Phillips and others that were warning about Joe Biden was not in the best position to lead the party to beat Donald Trump. Back to your data point. There was polling that showed we didn't want a rematch. You and I did Super Tuesday. We were talking about this, like, America doesn't even want a rematch. It was like 67% of Americans don't want a rematch. And going back to the journalistic angle where I come from this, you know, we did this on the show recently where a lot of segments, when we were listening back to KJP press conferences, a lot of the questions were focused on, press secretary, thank you. We were doing a lot, she was taking a lot of questions about how voters feel about Joe Biden's age.
Yeah.
But that's not the questions. The questions, again, back to this journalist part of framing questions. The man fell off a bike. The man gave a terrible debate performance and looked like he was completely out of it. 2020, he does an interview with CBS News and he looks incredibly cogent and he looks like he's there. And now what we're seeing is a frail old man, right? And so like, there's got to be something timeline-wise that we continue to ask what is being hidden. So now that the book is coming out, and again, Jake's coming on my show, so I'm going to ask him about this, but it's something's curious about it. It's different than what I'm talking about with the Democratic Party.
I think you're right.
Everybody knows older people who, again, it's a good day, bad day kind of situation. I think that's part of the difficulty of this story.
But the 25th Amendment's there so that the bad days, you don't accept them. And we don't let someone stay in the job who has the days that are that bad. I think Mike's right, though. Dean Phillips is owed a big apology. And that's something that's missing in this analysis by Democrats, this autopsy. No one's saying we should have listened to Dean Phillips. And the reason they didn't listen to Dean Phillips, who was a member of the Democratic leadership, who'd won in a tough suburban district, who was sufficiently liberal to satisfy most liberals, is Trump derangement syndrome. Most Democrats and a lot of people in the news media were so furious at the thought that Donald Trump could win, they didn't want to risk an open primary. They were all in on the game. It was all a rigging for Joe Biden.
With AI, almost anything is possible.
Because that's exactly what happened. They were paranoid. So they went with what they thought would be the safest bet. We know that that's normal. Since when don't we have an open primary? I mean, come on. This is at one point where if another country like Canada was watching American politics during that time, they could have easily been like, America, what the heck are you guys doing over there? No open primary, and he said it right there. They were not willing to risk it. They were so scared at the thought that Donald Trump could win, which he did, that they weren't even willing to go with the open primary. They just put Kamala Harris out there on the forefront. And that's pretty much how we ended up with her as a presidential candidate. Wasn't the right time, wasn't the right move. They talked about it. 67% of Americans said at the time that they felt that Joe Biden was too old to run for president a second time. Why didn't they listen? And at the minute that you see that poll, depending on how many votes you get, okay, if you say, well, that was only out of 197,000 votes. Okay, well, cast a wider poll. But if you've already got almost 250,000, yeah, I would say that you probably have the majority, and that they didn't take heed, they didn't pay attention, which is what Alyssa said, which is what the other gentleman said, and that's the reason why I constantly talk to them being tone deaf, because they paid no attention to what the people were saying. All right, guys, so staying on Fox News clips, we're going to take a look at Representative Ilhan Omar refuses to comment on Israelis killed. I'm going to go for now. That's what she says instead of giving condolences or answering any questions.
You know, to make sense of all this, well, not to make sense of it, but to talk about the straight line, the same attitude you see in the college campuses, the same celebration you saw October 7th with the killing of Jews over in Israel, is the same attitude of this 30-year-old last night in Washington, D.C. Proud to kill. Mark Levin is with us now, host of this great show over the weekend. Mark, your thought about what we just witnessed hours ago.
Well, my thought is this. I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a diplomat, so I'll call it as I see it. The West is weak. They're weak against this fusion of these Marxists and these Islamists. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars in our country and throughout Europe. Qatar is number one, Communist China is number two. That's not a mistake, that's not a coincidence. They're trying to destroy us from within. President Trump talks about the enemy within. This is the enemy within. We see it. There's a Kristallnacht taking place in our country every day and throughout Europe every day. Jews are not safe in every capital in Europe, and now they're not safe in our capital. And we always are sort of behind Europe in its decline over a period of years. We need to learn and see what's taking place. This has been about free speech, so the radical libertarians, in the face of this onslaught, would have us commit suicide. This is being funded by Qatar and other countries. There is a funding network. There are more Islamist front groups in this country, terrorist front groups in this country. They multiply like rabbits. Congress is not doing enough to stop this. I know the administration is doing yeoman's work, unlike the prior administration. This is what happens when you have open borders and unfettered and unvetted immigration, particularly from the Middle East.
Yep.
Our courts are not capable by ideological and administrative processes to deal with. In fact, they are obstructing efforts by this administration to deport the enemy, and they are the enemy. They're not an adversary. They're not a bunch of punks just with big mouths. They're marching through the streets like no Nazis ever have, like no Klansmen ever have in our country, calling for the destruction of the United States of America, the overthrow of the West, burning the American flag, chasing Jewish students on college campuses, threatening elderly Jews who hold signs on the streets peacefully, attacking our synagogues. Now I say this to my fellow Americans. Is this what we want? Is this who we are? Because the ruling class is letting us down. Seal the damn borders, which is what President Trump is doing. Stop every damn penny coming into this country from these terrorist states. I don't care if they put smiles on their faces and hold seminars or whatever the hell they're doing. They're the enemy. They're the enemy. They funded 9/11. 9/11 wasn't even about Jews or Israel. It's about us. They killed over 2,000 of our people. Let the Israelis win their war against Hamas. Stop holding them back. They killed over 1,200 of their people in the most heinous ways, so horrific that the videos haven't been released on any single cable or network television show. That's how horrible it is. If you want to act like a subhuman, you need to be treated like a subhuman. These terrorist organizations, they don't think like we do. They don't think like the West. They see weakness because there is weakness. They've all but destroyed our Ivy League schools and are working now in K through 12. What are we going to do? You know, the First Amendment, free speech, what are we going to do? Allow them to keep pouring money into our country, buying sporting events, buying politicians, buying businesses, and then pretend when they put smiles on their faces and they're driving around in their Mercedes-Benz, but they aren't the terrorists that they are? How many more reports have to be published about the amount of money that's being poured into this country by these terrorist states like Qatar, like Iran. We can allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon? The president says no. Isn't it time that the entire nation says no, rather than a debate on whether we can manage a nuclearized Iran? They want to destroy us. They've tried to assassinate our president. How many more signals do they need to send us? What else do they need to do? They are eating away at our country from within. Europe has basically been conquered. We need to put our foot down. These two precious human beings executed in cold blood. Let me tell you something, Brian. In 3 days, we'll be on to the next subject. Never even think about them again. They took hostages. They raped them. They murdered them. They starved them. They tortured them. They executed them. They're still in, 20 of them, in tunnels in Gaza. And the Israelis are being told to back off. Our media uses Hamas statistics, Hamas lies, to turn the world against the Jews in Israel and against the United States, to affect public opinion. The same American media that lied about Biden, lie about these terrorist regimes and what's taking place in Gaza, and our Congress, the Bernie Sanders, the Tlaibs, the Omars, the AOCs. They have a lot to answer for with this Marxist Islamist crap. And the fact of the matter is, they boycott the leader of Israel, Netanyahu, because they hate Israel. They say, oh, we don't mind Israel, it's Zionism we oppose. Zionism is the establishment of the state of Israel. It's the only indigenous people on the face of the earth that are now allowed to be indigenous. So we have to have a discussion in this country, but I'm not a rabbi and I'm not a diplomat. So I'll pray and I'll talk, but it's time for action.
So, Mark, I do find there's a little ignorance when it comes to some of the people that are in the middle of the street, too. They're getting away with it because they say free Palestine. But now you have the person that committed this act saying free Palestine as well. But they've been marching in the middle of the street with Hamas flags. They have been denying October the 7th the whole time. And people think they're just dumb kids. We got a report that's from the hostages that were released that they were communicating with the college campuses. It's like a sleeper cell that's right in front of us, and we don't seem to be paying attention to it.
That is brilliantly put. And like this guy, Khalil, isn't it funny the Democrats are defending him? Every disgusting reprobate. They circle the wagons to defend them. The Constitution that they've been trashed and attacked. The framers who wrote it, they attacked and trashed. Now they wave it around like there's some First Amendment right to be a mouthpiece and a leader for a front group that seeks to overthrow our colleges and destroy our learning. The West is under attack. This is a war against the West. People need to understand the mentality that we're up against, whether it's the Marxists or the Islamists. They have a joint venture to take out Europe and now the United States from within. Just as Reagan destroyed the Soviet Union without firing a shot, they intend to destroy the United States without firing a shot. They're doing a hell of a good job of it. Look at the rot in our colleges and universities. We scream about the First Amendment and free speech. We don't even have academic freedom. The faculty hires the faculty. They hire people of the same ideology, the same mentality. We're brainwashing our children. We taxpayers are paying for this. We parents are paying the tuition for this. We have a say in this. This isn't about free speech. This isn't about civil liberty. This is about whether we survive as a free nation. And it is happening now. Donald Trump is fighting it as best as he can. The Democrats are basically the umbrella for all these reprobates and malcontents and so forth and so on. They have them within their own midst. And we have some, I don't even say we, they're not Republicans, some of these phony isolationists who have their own platforms and so forth out there. Israel's going to drag us into a war. We're in a damn war, don't you understand? They're in our country right now. They want to kill us. They want to take down our towers. They're destroying our universities. It's not a matter of Israel dragging anybody into anything. This is a war on London. It's a war on Paris. It's a war on Amsterdam. It's a war on Washington and New York. And it's happening in front of us right now. Whether the media wants to report it fully or not, it is taking place right now.
Mark, you mentioned AOC and you mentioned Omar. Well, someone in D.C., a reporter asked Ilhan Omar a comment. Can you at least just comment on this? And she didn't. Listen.
Congresswoman Omar,
Anybody say?
can I get your reaction to the shooting that happened in D.C. last night?
I'm gonna go for now.
I'm going to go for now, Mark. Couldn't even say condolences for the family.
That's because she's an Islamist. Let's not play games. She's an Islamist who got elected to Congress as part of what Donald Trump's told the enemy within. It's time to take our mittens off and deal with reality. She's an Islamist. Tlaib is an Islamist. Bernie Sanders is a Marxist. I dare them to sue me. I dare them to sue me. I will counterclaim. I will get all the information I need. I will expose these people in civil court because they cannot be exposed criminally. I will do it myself if I have to. This is the enemy within. Our media, some of it's bought and paid for, some of it's not, day after day, spewing the Hamas propaganda about casualties. Even Hamas amended the casualties, and they're still spewing the casualties. There are Jews that are still in tunnels in Gaza. Who put them there? Who attacked Israel on October 6th? Free Palestine. They had their own country. It's called Gaza. What they mean by free Palestine is destroy the Jews, kill the Jews, get rid of Israel. I have a message for them. Israel's not going anywhere. Israel's not going anywhere. Persians couldn't do it. The Romans couldn't do it. The Babylonians couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. And they're not going to do it either. And I have another message for them.
Not gonna happen.
Donald Trump is president of the United States. The United States not going anywhere either. And he has a message for them. Israel's not going anywhere. Israel's not going anywhere. Persians couldn't do it. The Romans couldn't do it. The Babylonians couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. And they're not going to do it either. And I have another message for them. Donald Trump is president of the United States. The United States not going anywhere either. And he has an all-hands-on government effort to fight this anti-Semitism, and I couldn't be prouder of what he's trying to do. It would be nice if we had some help from Hakeem Jeffries. It would be nice if Chuck Schumer would stop writing books and actually do something about it. But the Democrats aren't the ones that held hearings about what's going on in our colleges. The Republicans are. And I don't say this to be a partisan. I say this as an American who sees exactly what's taking place.
So, Mark, what do you think is going to happen out of these talks that could take place this weekend? Word is that Israel is losing patience, and they just want to take out what they can of Iran's nuclear apparatus. What would you think if Israel just did it on their own?
You know, the president likes to say America first. Well, I'm sure Netanyahu has to say, well, Israel first. And while they love America, they love us, they have to protect their people. And for them, it's life and death. Just as it was for us after 9/11. We didn't ask Israel's opinion, Europe's opinion, Asia's opinion, anybody else's opinion. We knew what we had to do. The Prime Minister knows what he has to do. Hamas must be defeated. I don't care how many envoys we send over there and all the leaks to Axios and all the rest. Hamas must be defeated. That's number one. Number two, Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. And if there's a deal and the Israelis don't feel it's sufficient, then the Israelis need to take care of business. It's that simple. Because President Trump won't be president forever. These guys play long ball. They not only want to destroy the state of Israel, they want to destroy the United States. Their war is not just with Judaism, it's with Christianity, it's with other Muslims that don't embrace their Islamist viewpoint. They slaughter their own people more than anybody else does.
So true.
This is evil on earth, and people need to understand that.
The great one, Mark Levin. I appreciate you.
I'm Steve Doocy. I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Give me 1 sec. Let's run this back here. You know, in the comment section, they're asking, I was looking it up here on the other device. They're saying, why is Ilhan still in the U.S. government? Do we feel like she should not be in the U.S. government at all? You've had a couple of people over these years saying that they're not even sure. And even to take away from just Ilhan, you have some people who don't like the fact that there are people who are not just straight up American citizens in the government. Like, you have people that can't stand that. So Ilhan making comments like this, you know, like he said, listen, at the end of the day.
On this, and she didn't listen.
Mark.
Congresswoman Omar, can I get your reaction to the shooting that happened in D.C. last night?
I'm gonna go for now.
I'm gonna go for now.
I'm gonna go for now, Mark. Couldn't even say condolences for the family.
Yeah, that's where I was like, yeah, she kind of makes herself look really obvious there, right? Even if you don't care to make too much of a comment, you could at least say, hey, you know, I don't want to say much, but we never condone, you know, the taking of a life. Not even that. So I felt like she kind of told on herself, and this is where people talk about like the craziness of the Democrats that we've seen post-election. All right, guys, so staying with Fox News clips, Brian Urlacher tackles the trans athlete debate. Let's take a look.
For Chicago Bears linebacker and Hall of Famer Brian Urlacher joins us now. Brian, welcome to the program and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sandra. I appreciate it.
You grabbed a lot of headlines for that, and we certainly took notice. So why is it not fair to have these transgender athletes that are biological males in girls' sports, from your view?
Athletically, it's just not fair. You know, men are meant to play with men. That's why there's the NBA, the WNBA, or LPGA and PGA Tour. They're different. I just don't understand how people think it's okay for a male to participate in a women's sport. There's just so many biological differences. You know, the guy that was swimming with the women there, and you know, from Penn a couple of years ago with Riley Gaines and some of her teammates, and you saw how he was with the men compared to the way he did with the women. It's just not fair. It's pretty obvious to most people.
You know, in that podcast, you asked the question, why is this even a debate? In that moment, I believe it was a rhetorical question, but it's a question we've been asking. Why are we not seeing more women standing up for girls and women who are dealing with this? I mean, we just had a 17-year-old girl on the program yesterday who's standing up and saying, this isn't right. Someone stand up for us, but these young girls are having to fight for this themselves.
Yeah, I don't understand that one bit. You know, you see these girls stand up, and it's really hurting themselves when they stand up because they're not competing because they don't want to compete against the man. So they're stepping down from their competitions, and it's kind of funny coming from people who push women's rights and they want to fight for women's rights, but they don't want to fight for women's rights in sports. They want men to come in there and dominate the sports against the women. It's not fair. It's common sense. I think I've seen President Trump talk about it since he's been elected. It's pretty much common sense just to not have men and women's sports.
You know, there's some more and more familiar faces that are male that are standing up for these girls and fighting for them. Aaron Rodgers, a very familiar face. He too is speaking out against these trans athletes competing in girls' sports. Listen.
The trans women movement is actually anti-woman.
100%, especially when it comes to sports. 100%.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Sports. Yeah. You're not seeing trans men dominating anything.
No,
because there's a biological difference.
Chromosomes. That's it. Double X and XY.
That's way too much common sense there, Joe.
So kudos to more and more men who are speaking up for these girls. And Brian, I know in the context of this podcast, you were discussing this transgender athlete in Minnesota, a pitcher, a biological male, who's been pitching on a girls' softball team, winning 14 straight games. And I know that's really why you passionately spoke out against these trans athletes participating on girls' teams.
Yeah, pretty amazing stats, you know, for a man pitching versus women. That's pretty good stats. It's just not fair. You know, I saw a track athlete in South Carolina a couple years ago doing the same thing, just winning every event. It's just, there's biological differences. Men should not be competing against women. It's not fair. It's dangerous. You know, you saw the volleyball players spiking the man spiking the ball, hitting the woman in the face. It's just, it's not fair, and it can be really dangerous. It's funny what Aaron said about, you don't see men trying to compete against women in our, women trying to compete against men in our sports. You don't see them trying to play football. You don't see them trying to do things that could possibly, wouldn't be as good at or could get hurt at.
Yeah,
It is remarkable. We have had athlete after athlete coming on this program. Katie McGinnis most recently, Stephanie Turner, she was the fencer who took a knee and would not go against her male opponent. Cassidy Carlisle, the cross-country athlete, losing out to a biological male. The list seems to keep getting longer. You're a big voice in all of this, Brian. Thanks for coming on with us, and a big Go Bears from the Chicago Cub.
Thanks, Sandra. Appreciate you having me on. I'm a big fan. I watch you guys every day.
Thanks so much, Brian. All right.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page.
So I think it's interesting because we have there the former linebacker of the Chicago Bears, and he says, listen, there's way too many, physical differences biologically, like, for this to be happening. Why is this even a debate? It's kind of like what I said yesterday in the live stream when I said I don't understand why the whole transgendering thing has ever really been a debate, right? We know that there are two genders. I did it yesterday on the live stream. I said that about 5 years ago, I asked Google how many genders there were, and Google told me there were 63, right? Okay, so yesterday on the live stream, we looked again. How many genders does Google say there is? It says that there is no set number. And I'm like, okay, Google. Now Google's lost its mind. That's what we have to deal with. All right, guys, so shout out to Cliff Buell. Here we are at the last clip of the live stream. We got Cliff Buell in the house. Go check his channel out if you get a chance. Last name Buell. B as in boy, U as in umbrella, E as in echo, L as in Lima, L as in Lima. That's how you spell his last name. Title is Crown of Thorns, Have We Been Lied To? Alright. So he asks, it was the crown that was placed on Jesus' head, was it a crown of thorns or a helmet of thorns? So,
is it a crown of thorns or a helmet of thorns? Watch.
This is the helmet of thorns. Yes, I remember reading or hearing at some point that actually it's 3D. Or not just 3D, but it's, it goes around the whole head. The whole head is really like a helmet, like a cap, a helmet. And so what do we see the correspondence with? These are 3-inch Bethlehem thorns. When they dry, they're as sharp as nails. This crown of thorns, the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest gospel, it says, and the Romans fashioned a crown of thorns and placed it on his head to humiliate him. This is the King of the Jews. They placed this on his head. And what do we see on the shroud? 50 puncture wounds in the scalp that would have caused profuse bleeding. And so when he goes etro homo, the man, you can imagine crown of thorns, blood stained. The scene would have been incomprehensible. It also just occurs to me looking at this, for people who will find it unfamiliar, that's not what the crown of thorns looks like. This is what an actual crown looks like. Exactly. Actual crowns are not headbands. Right. Have you ever seen like the crown of St. Stephen? Yes. There we go, crown in the UK. They look like this. Yes. They cover your whole head.
Is it a crown of thorns or a helmet of thorns?
He's absolutely right. See, he says, like, if you look at the crown that's on, like, a king or someone of royalty in another country, it looks like a crown. Like, it covers your whole head. If you look like a king on a deck of cards, right? The crown is covering his whole head. So he's saying, he's just expressing to him, like, this is like what it actually looks like. That's why the gentleman said, yeah, I heard it was 3D. And it's like, not that it's necessarily 3D, but it is like an entire helmet shape that would be set on, the head of Jesus Christ. And he says, what do we see on the shroud? 50 puncture wounds in the 50 puncture wounds in the head, which he would have been bleeding profusely. So I mean, I just think it's amazing, to see that, for him to have it in hand like that, and just again more proof, more evidence. And what do I say? A lot of the times when it comes to like Christian, anything related to Christian history, Jesus, anything Christianity, I say is hope, most of all, because that's what it does, is hope. Not just for the body of Christ, but for those who don't yet know Jesus. So, with that being said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. It's getting late. I'm tired. I wanted to end it before midnight. I'm going to go chill with my wife. So until next time, guys, which is tomorrow, we'll be on tomorrow early. That, actually, you have my word on that. So yeah, until next time, guys, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, love yourselves, love one another, and be peaceful. I'm gonna say tomorrow we'll probably hop on here no later than 3 p.m. for the first live stream. So we'll be on here tomorrow, guys. Peace.